Sarah's world shattered on a Tuesday morning, not with the sound of an explosion, but with the low, cutting noise of a few careless words. That day had begun like so many others in the 8th month of her pregnancy, with a body that no longer felt like her own and an exhaustion that seeped into her soul. Waking up was a Herculean effort. Every movement was negotiated with aching joints and a weight in her belly that constantly reminded her of the miracle and the burden she carried. That morning, the only commitment on the horizon was her prenatal appointment, one of the few rituals that still connected her to a sense of purpose and care. The simple act of getting ready to leave the house, however, became a silent battle against the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, her face rounded by swelling dark circles that the best concealer couldn't hide, and a transformed body, serving a greater purpose, but one that made her feel disconnected from herself. With a sigh that carried the weight of weeks of discomfort and sleepless nights, she rummaged through her closet. The clothes she once loved now seemed to belong to another life. Everything was tight, uncomfortable, inadequate. She ended up opting for practicality, the unofficial uniform of women at the limit of their strength. A loose knit dress in a melancholic grey that matched her mood, and flat sandals, the only ones that still fit her swollen feet. The sticky, humid heat of Atlanta was already noticeable, even in the morning, and with an automatic gesture she pulled her long, once well-kept hair into a makeshift bun on top of her head. It wasn't a hairstyle, it was a surrender. It was the quick fix of a woman whose patience had run out along with her energy. It was the look of someone just trying to survive the day, not someone seeking admiration. It was in this moment of vulnerability that David appeared in the hallway, already dressed for work in his impeccable suit, exuding the energy of someone in control of his universe. He stopped at the bedroom door, and the first thing he did was not give her a good morning kiss or ask how she felt. It was to judge. His eyes, once sources of affection, were now cold scanners, running over Sarah's figure with palpable disapproval. "You're going out like that?" he asked, and the question hung in the air not as a genuine inquiry, but as the beginning of a sentence. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, an exercise in self-control that had become as routine as brushing her teeth. She braced herself for what was coming next, the litany of criticisms he seemed to believe was a form of constructive feedback. He approached, invading the little personal space she still felt she had. The scent of his expensive cologne contrasted with the neutral smell of stretch mark lotion that enveloped her. "For God's sake, Sarah," he began, his tone bordering on disgust. "Look at the state of you. That dress makes you look huge, like a sack of potatoes. Don't you have anything better to wear?" He didn't wait for an answer, continuing his cruel monologue. "And that hair? What a ridiculous bun is that? You look like a slob. You've completely let yourself go, don't you realize?" Each word was a microaggression, a small cut that, added to hundreds of others, made her bleed inside. She felt her heart shrink, a physical sensation of shriveling, as if her body was trying to become smaller to escape the verbal attack. She wanted to scream, to tell him she was carrying his child, that her body was working double time, that exhaustion was her constant companion. But the energy to defend herself simply didn't exist anymore. Her silence, however, was not interpreted as pain, but as agreement, giving him license to proceed. And then he turned to the bedroom window, which had a privileged view of the neighbor's house, and delivered the coup de grace. The blow that would finally break something irreparably inside her. "Look at the neighbor's wife, Jessica," he said, with a tone of admiration he hadn't used with Sarah in years. "When she was pregnant, she looked beautiful, always impeccable. And now with the baby, she's a knockout. Do you see her going out for a walk? Always put together, makeup on, perfect hair. She takes care of herself. She values herself. You could try, right? Make an effort." The comparison, the deadliest weapon used to communicate that she wasn't enough, that she had failed the test, that another woman, in similar circumstances, was inherently superior. The words were not just heard, they were felt as physical assaults. A punch to the stomach, a slap to the face. Sarah's world, already fragile and grey, shattered into a million pieces. In that instant of deafening silence that followed, something fundamentally changed within Sarah. The dam that for months had contained her hurt, her frustration, and her silent resentment not only broke but pulverized. Yet instead of a flood of tears or an explosion of rage, what emerged from the ruins was a terrifying calm, a razor-sharp clarity that cut through all the fog of hope and denial that still enveloped her. She realized with absolute certainty that no matter how hard she tried, she would never be enough for him, because the problem wasn't with her, it was in his gaze. With a slowness that seemed to last an eternity, she swallowed the cry that scratched her throat. She raised her face, and her eyes, once pleading, were now empty of any emotion he could recognize. They met his, and for the first time, she didn't feel smaller. "You should marry her then," Sarah said. Her voice didn't tremble. There was no sarcasm, no anger. There was only the weight of a final conclusion, a door closing with a soft but definitive click. David was speechless, his face a mask of astonishment. He was prepared for drama, for an argument he would win with his cold logic, but not for that icy acceptance. That sentence completely disarmed him because there was no way to counter it. It was the logical response to his own cruelty. Sarah didn't wait for his reaction. She moved with a new determination, grabbing her purse and the car keys that were on the dresser. "Go to work, David," she said, her voice still in that strangely neutral tone. "I'm going to the prenatal appointment alone." He finally found his voice, starting to stammer something about, "It's not like that," about her being dramatic. But Sarah was already at the door. She turned one last time, and her look was that of a stranger. "I don't have to listen to anything else from you today." And with that she left, closing the door behind her. The sound of the lock clicking echoed in the silent room, marking the end of an era. In that moment, Sarah wasn't just choosing to go to an appointment alone. She was, for the first time in a long time, choosing herself, choosing her peace. And that choice, born of the deepest pain, would be the catalyst for the biggest change in her life. The waiting room of the clinic was a universe apart, an aquarium of prominent bellies and whispered conversations about heartburn and baby names. Sarah sat in a corner, feeling like a spectator of her own life, disconnected from the other women who seemed to radiate an aura of happy expectation. David's phrase still echoed in her mind, a toxic buzz that muffled all other sounds. Knockout, effort, slob. She flipped through a parenting magazine without registering a single word, the images of smiling families seeming like cruel mockery. When her name was called, she stood up with the slowness of a much older person, her body heavy not only with the weight of the baby, but with the burden of a humiliation that seemed to have lodged in her bones. "Doctor." Eleanor Vance, with her decades of experience in dealing with the complexities of the female soul, noticed the change in Sarah the instant she entered the room. The apathy in her gaze, the way her shoulders were slumped, the absence of that soft glow that had accompanied her in the first months of pregnancy. "Sarah, dear, how are you feeling?" the doctor asked, as she helped her onto the examination table. "Everything okay? You look a little down today." The genuine concern in the doctor's voice was like an outstretched hand, and for a second Sarah felt the temptation to grab it, to vent, to pour out all the pain and loneliness that consumed her. But the energy for such an act of vulnerability simply wasn't there. Instead, she summoned from the depths of her reserves a smile, a fragile, crooked contraction of her lips. "I'm fine, doctor. Just the normal fatigue of late pregnancy. You know how it is." The lie came out with an ease that frightened her. Inside she was bleeding, an internal hemorrhage of self-esteem and hope. But on the outside she was the image of resignation. The appointment proceeded. The strong heartbeats of the baby on the monitor were the only proof that life was still strongly pulsating somewhere inside her. While Sarah navigated her silent pain, David's day was tinged with a restlessness he refused to admit. Her response, that icy calm and the phrase "marry her then," had disarmed him. He spent the day at the office trying to focus on spreadsheets and meetings, but the image of Sarah's impassive face overlaid the numbers. He felt irritated, wronged. In his head, he was just being honest and giving a nudge so she wouldn't let herself go. He couldn't understand the depth of the wound he had inflicted. To him, they were just words. To her, they were the final verdict on her worth. He decided that, Upon arriving home, he would act with magnanimity. He would buy flowers, maybe her favorite dessert, and the incident would be forgotten, swept under the rug of marital routine, like so many others before. When he arrived home, the apartment was immersed in a dense, heavy silence. Sarah was in the living room folding some baby clothes. He tried the casual approach. "Hey, honey. Busy day." She didn't look up. "Normal," she replied, her voice a thread, devoid of any emotion. He placed the flowers he had bought on the table. She didn't acknowledge them. He tried to strike up a conversation about work, about traffic, about any banality that could fill the void. Her answers were monosyllabic, short, efficient. She wasn't fighting, she was absent. It was like talking to a wall that had once been his home. Dinner was consumed in an oppressive silence, the sound of cutlery against the plates sounding like hammering. Her indifference was a much more effective form of torture than any argument. It was later that night that fear truly began to set in. Lying in bed, pretending to read a book, he watched her move around the room. And for the first time, he really saw. He noticed what complacency and arrogance had prevented him from realizing. Her side of the closet, once overflowing, now had empty spaces, like missing teeth in a smile. The black travel suitcase, the one they used for vacations, was not in its usual place on top of the wardrobe. He got up, his heart starting to race, and went to the baby's room. The crib, which they had assembled together on a rare afternoon of complicity, was covered with a white sheet like furniture in an abandoned house, a mausoleum for a future that wouldn't happen. His gaze darted to the small desk in the corner, and panic tied a knot in his throat. The leather folder where she kept her most important documents, passport, diploma, certificates, had disappeared. Reality hit him with the force of a runaway train. This wasn't a passing drama. It was a plan executed in silence right under his nose. His heart pounded, a toxic mix of genuine fear of loss and even stronger, wounded ego. The idea that she, the docile and predictable Sarah, could orchestrate such a methodical departure was an insult to his intelligence, to his control. He returned to the room, his facade of calm crumbling. "Sarah," he began, his voice hoarse. "What's going on? What does this mean?" He tried to apologize again, the words tumbling out, a confession of panic, not of remorse. "I was an idiot, I know. I don't think before I speak. Forgive me, let's talk." She, who was already lying down, remained with her back to him, her body a statue of indifference. She didn't answer. Her silence was a sentence, a wall of ice that his hasty apologies couldn't melt. David didn't sleep. He spent the night in a state of feverish anxiety, alternating between anger that she was overreacting and terror that she would actually leave him. At dawn, exhausted, he went down to the kitchen, perhaps hoping that the daylight would bring some normalcy, that he would find her making coffee as she always did, that it was all just a nightmare. The kitchen was impeccably clean and empty, and on the wooden table, in the exact spot where his plate should be, rested two objects that sealed his fate. A white envelope with his name written in Sarah's elegant handwriting, and on top of the envelope, catching a ray of morning sun and shining with a cold, accusing light, was her wedding ring. The small gold circle that had once symbolized an eternal promise now looked like a small tombstone. David's world didn't stop. It shattered, just like Sarah's the day before. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled his soul, that whatever was written in that letter, it would be the end. David's hands trembled in a way he didn't remember them ever trembling before. The small gold circle of the ring seemed to weigh a ton when he removed it from the top of the envelope. For a moment, he just stared at the object, the materialization of years of a shared life, now reduced to an abandoned accessory on a kitchen table. With his heart pounding against his ribs, he picked up the letter. The paper was of good quality, the same Sarah used for her important correspondence, and his name, David, was written in a handwriting he knew so well, but which now seemed strangely impersonal. There was no "Dear David" or any other affectionate term, just his name, dry and direct. He tore open the envelope with a feverish urgency, unfolding the sheet that contained his verdict. Sarah's handwriting was firm, every curve and every stroke drawn with a precision that contrasted violently with the chaos that had settled inside him. It was not the handwriting of a woman in tears, but of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. He began to read, and the words leaped from the page, each a calculated blow, delivered with the precision of a surgeon. David, yesterday you compared me to the neighbor's wife. You said Jessica was beautiful, put together, perfect. A knockout, and you suggested I make an effort to be like her. For a long time I believed the problem was me, that I wasn't pretty enough, interesting enough, good enough. But your cruelty yesterday made me see something I refused to see. I was at the grocery store last week, looking like a sack of potatoes, as you so eloquently put it, and Michael, Jessica's husband, approached me. He didn't come to flirt. He came to ask me for a recipe, and then he started talking about how much he admired me. He said he saw me taking care of the house, managing everything, always calm, always focused on our future. He said he wished his wife, your knockout Jessica, would focus less on her appearance and more on building a real home. And then, David, he looked at me in my simple dress with my exhaustion stamped on my face, and he said the phrase that, at the time, I didn't understand, but which now makes perfect sense. He said, "Sarah, you have a light you don't even realize. If you were ever single, I would thank God every day for the chance to have a woman like you by my side, while you were diminishing me, comparing me, turning me into nothing. The very husband of the woman you idolize was wishing he had someone exactly like me, someone who cares, who matters, who builds a real home, not a showcase. But don't worry, I'm not going to be with him. I don't need another man to validate my worth. I only need myself. And now you have the chance to go after the perfection you admire so much. The path is clear. Who knows, maybe Jessica is waiting for an admirer like you. I'm leaving. I'm going to a place where I am valued, where my effort is seen, where my love is received, not measured. I'm going to my parents' house, where I will have my son in peace. Good luck with the perfection you praised so much. I hope she knows how to make your coffee the way you like it. Sarah." When David finished reading the last word, the paper trembled in his hand. The strength left his legs as if his bones had dissolved. He fell, not dramatically, but like a building imploding on itself, his knees hitting the cold kitchen floor with a dull thud. The letter was not an attack of rage. It was an autopsy of his character, his blindness, his arrogance. The irony was so overwhelming, so perfectly cruel, that it was almost poetic. He had used the neighbor's grass to humiliate his wife, unaware that the neighbor was looking at his garden with envy. The image of Michael, the always quiet and polite neighbor, desiring his wife, his Sarah, hit him with the force of a physical assault. It wasn't love that brought him down. It was pride. The shattered pride of a man who thought he was the supreme judge of a woman's worth, only to discover that his verdict was a joke. He who saw himself as the prize was, in fact, the fool of the story. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had been exposed, unmasked by the very weapon he had chosen. And then the crying came, an ugly, guttural cry that tore at his throat. They were not the silent tears of a repentant man. They were the convulsive sobs of a king who has just lost his kingdom and realizes the fault is entirely his. He wasn't crying out of longing for Sarah, the woman, the companion. He was crying for the loss of Sarah, the function, the system that kept his world comfortable and in order. He was crying for the blow to his ego, for the humiliation of having been so blind. He had just lost the one thing he always thought was his by right, the only person he never imagined would have the strength to leave. And in the silence of that sunny kitchen, with the cold wedding ring on the table and the crumpled letter in his hand, David understood too late that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. While David drowned in his own wounded pride hundreds of miles away, Sarah was breathing. For the first time in months, the air filling her lungs seemed clean, devoid of the tension and judgment that had become the atmosphere of their home. The trip to her parents' house, in a quiet suburban town, had been a blur of tears and relief. Upon arrival, she didn't have to give long explanations. Her mother, a woman of few words and much wisdom, just hugged her at the door, a hug that said, "You are safe now." Her father, a calm and protective man, carried her bags inside without asking a single question. but with a look that promised to face anyone who dared to hurt his daughter. In that house, love was not a bargaining chip, nor a weapon. It was a safe harbor. They welcomed her, protected her, loved her unconditionally, allowing her to finally break down so she could rebuild herself. Her childhood bedroom, with the walls still painted a soft lilac, became her sanctuary. There she slept for 12 hours straight, a deep, dreamless sleep, the sleep of a warrior who finally laid down her arms. For David, however, the war was just beginning, a war against his own newly discovered incompetence. In the first few days, he lived in a state of furious denial. "She'll come back," he told himself. "It's just drama. She can't live without me." He went to work, maintained the facade of a controlled man, but upon returning to the silent, empty apartment, reality slapped him in the face. Sarah's absence was not just an emotional void, it was a logistical collapse. The house, which had always functioned with the precision of a Swiss watch, began to disintegrate. The sink filled with dirty dishes, the trash overflowed, the clean clothes ran out, and hunger, a basic and irritating need, became his enemy. In 1 week, life without Sarah taught him 3 painful and humiliating truths. The first, he couldn't cook. He, the man who closed million-dollar deals, who commanded teams, was completely inept in the kitchen. His first attempt to fry an egg resulted in a black rubbery mass stuck to the pan. The rice turned into a shapeless mush one day, and charcoal the next. After 3 days of eating only deli sandwiches and takeout, the cost of which began to weigh on his budget, he gave up. The second truth, he didn't know how to keep a house running. The seemingly simple task of doing laundry turned into a disaster when a single red sock, lost among the whites, stained an entire machine load of dress shirts a pale, embarrassing pink. The attempt to clean the bathroom resulted in a small flood, as he used the wrong products and forgot a cloth blocking the drain. The house, once an oasis of order and cleanliness, quickly turned into a chaos of disorder and dirt, a physical reflection of his inner state. But the third truth was the most devastating of all, the one that hit him at the core of his identity. He realized that he had never valued Sarah as a woman, as the mother of his child, or as his wife and companion. He saw her, unconsciously, as a luxury servant, an administrator of his comfort, a manager of his domestic life, a provider of essential services that he had always taken for granted. He didn't miss their conversations, her smile, her touch. He missed her functionality. He missed the ready coffee in the morning, the ironed clothes in the closet, the hot food on the plate, the peace of knowing that the complex world of home maintenance was being taken care of by someone else, freeing him to focus on his own navel. The longing he felt was not for love, it was for service. To worsen his situation, the city where they lived was not an anonymous metropolis. It was a place where everyone knew each other, where news traveled faster than the wind, and the gossip about the separation spread like wildfire. At the bakery, the supermarket, the gym, he felt the stares, heard the whispers. "Did you see David? He looks like a zombie. I heard Sarah left, pregnant and all. The neighbor told me he ordered pizza 3 days in a row. He doesn't even know how to turn on the stove. Now he'll know what real life is like." He thought the house cleaned itself. Each comment was a small stab at his already battered ego. He, who had always prided himself on his image as a successful and controlled man, was now the protagonist of a local tragic comedy, the abandoned and incompetent husband. The public humiliation was almost as painful as the private one. He began to avoid public places, isolating himself even more in his chaotic apartment. The image of the neighbor's perfect wife, Jessica, now haunted him in a different way. He sometimes saw her through the window, always impeccable, and instead of admiration, he felt a bitter resentment. Sarah's letter had poisoned his perception. He now saw her not as an ideal, but as a fraud, a woman who probably had a husband as unhappy as he felt now. But this perception brought no comfort. It only reinforced the overwhelming truth. He had traded gold for the false shine of costume jewelry. And what hurt the most, the wound that throbbed incessantly, was not the absence of Sarah, the person. It was the unbearable absence of the woman who, silently and without fanfare, took care of absolutely everything. Allowing him to live his life as a king in a castle He had never bothered to learn how to build. Time, which for Sarah was a balm of healing and rediscovery, was a slow and continuous erosion for David. Sarah's last month of pregnancy passed in a nest of affection at her parents' house. She reconnected with herself, took long walks, read the books that were piled on her bedside table, and most importantly prepared for motherhood with a serenity she didn't think was possible. The absence of David and his constant criticisms allowed her to flourish. Her face lost the swelling of anxiety, her eyes regained their sparkle, and she embraced the transformations of her body not as a flaw, but as a miracle. Meanwhile, David lived in a self-inflicted purgatory. The chaos in his apartment became chronic, and his domestic incompetence a constant source of frustration. It was then that he initiated a new tactic, the bombardment of messages. Every day, Sarah's phone vibrated with his pleas. The messages formed a pattern so clear it was almost pathetic. "Sarah, come home. It's so hard here without you. I can't do anything alone. The house is a mess. I burned another pan today." And the most frequent of all, "Please come back. I'm exhausted." Sarah read each one not with anger, but with an analytical clarity. She saw the pattern. In no message did he say, "I miss you. I miss us. I love you. Forgive me for hurting you." The messages were always about him, about his difficulty, his exhaustion, his inability. He wasn't asking for his wife back, he was summoning his employee to return to her post. Each message was a confirmation that her decision to leave was the best one of her life. She never replied. Her silence continued to be her most powerful weapon. The day Leo was born arrived on a sunny spring morning. The delivery was calm, surrounded by the love and support of her mother. When Sarah held her son for the first time, a healthy boy with curious eyes, the world reconfigured itself. All the suffering, all the humiliation, everything seemed small and distant in the face of the magnitude of that overwhelming love. That small being was proof that she was more than enough. She was an entire universe for him. The news of the birth reached David through Sarah's father in a short, formal phone call. 2 days later, he appeared at her parents' door. He was thinner with deep dark circles and unshaven. He looked like a defeated man. He brought a huge teddy bear and a bouquet of flowers, rehearsed gestures from a script he thought he should follow. When Sarah's mother let him in, he saw Sarah sitting in an armchair breastfeeding the baby. The scene hit him. The sight of his son, so small and vulnerable, and of Sarah, so serene and complete in her role as a mother, broke the last barrier of his self-control. He cried. Thick, silent tears streamed down his face as he approached. Sarah watched the scene in silence, her heart cautious. She analyzed his crying, not with compassion, but with the distance of someone who had learned to decipher his intentions. And she realized. He cried when looking at the baby. His gaze did not fix on her, did not seek forgiveness in her eyes. His emotion was entirely directed at the child, the symbol of fatherhood, the extension of himself. He wasn't crying for the family he had broken. He wasn't crying for the marriage he had destroyed. He wasn't crying for the woman he had humiliated. He was crying for his son, a genuine emotion perhaps, but terribly self-centered. It was the crying of someone who sees a part of himself materialized, not the crying of someone who mourns the loss of an us. After a few minutes, he managed to compose himself. He sat in a nearby chair, his gaze still fixed on little Leo. "He's beautiful, Sarah," he whispered. "He looks like me." Sarah didn't answer. She just continued to rock her son. The silence stretched, uncomfortable for him, but peaceful for her. And then he said the phrase that confirmed all her suspicions, that revealed the true nature of his remorse. With a tired sigh, he looked around, at the clean and organized house, at the smell of home-cooked food coming from the kitchen, and said, "You could come home, right? Now with Leo. It would make things a lot easier for me." The phrase hung in the air, naked and raw in its selfishness. Make things a lot easier for me. It wasn't, "I want to take care of you." It wasn't, "Let's build a family for him." It was, "Come back so my life can be easier." In that instant, any shred of doubt Sarah might have had evaporated. He hadn't changed. He hadn't learned anything about love or partnership. He had only learned that life without her services was inconvenient. He didn't want to rebuild a love. He wanted to rebuild his comfort. He didn't see her as the mother of his child, the woman of his life. He saw her as the solution to his domestic problems. Sarah looked at Leo's sleeping face and then at David. A sad but resolute smile touched her lips. A silent but unwavering decision was made in her heart. She would not go back. Not to be the solution to his life, not to be the manager of his comfort. That path was closed forever. She was a mother now, and her main duty was to protect her son. And the greatest protection she could give him was to keep him away from that environment, away from that man who could only love himself. No, she would never go back. Never again. The next 3 months were a metamorphosis. Sarah, immersed in the chaotic and wonderful routine of motherhood, rebuilt herself from the inside out. Every sleepless night, every diaper change, every toothless smile from Leo was another brick in the foundation of her new identity. She was no longer David's wife. She was Leo's mother, and that definition was infinitely more powerful. With the unconditional support of her parents, she navigated the challenges of the first few months, discovering a strength in herself she didn't know she possessed. Her body, which had once been a source of criticism, was now a source of nourishment and comfort for her son. Her fatigue, once a sign of weakness in her husband's eyes, was now the badge of honor for her unconditional love. Emotionally, she was stronger, more centered. The distance and silence had been the best medicine, allowing the wounds to heal without the constant application of salt. One afternoon, while scrolling through her phone, she received a message on a social media platform. It was from Michael, the neighbor. "Hi Sarah, I hope you and Leo are doing well. I saw your post about the new baby. Congratulations. I was just thinking about you because I saw David at the grocery store today, and he looked pretty rough. I just wanted to check in and see if everything was okay. No need to reply if you're busy, just wanted to send good wishes." Sarah reread the message several times. The words were simple, but what they didn't contain was the most important thing. There was no pressure. There were no ulterior motives. There was no hint of insinuation or flirting. There was only respect, care, genuine, disinterested concern. It was the antithesis of everything she had received from David lately. With a genuine smile, she replied with the same politeness and lightness. And there, through a simple exchange of messages, a pleasant, calm friendship was born, based on a mutual respect that was like a breath of fresh air. Meanwhile, David's life continued its downward spiral. He had become a caricature of himself. To the outside world on social media, he projected the image of a free and independent man. He posted photos at trendy bars, surrounded by different women every weekend, with captions celebrating the single life. But the reality, which his closest friends and neighbors witnessed, was different. He lived in an apartment that oscillated between disorder and dirt. He constantly complained to anyone who would listen that he wasn't cut out for domestic life, that it was absurd for a man to have to worry about these things. The facade of independence crumbled at night when loneliness and despair hit. It was during these hours that he bombarded Sarah's phone with tearful and contradictory messages, claiming he wanted his family back, that he missed his son. But the truth, transparent to Sarah, was that he didn't miss the family. He missed the structure she provided. He wanted someone to clean up his mess, cook his food, and organize his life, so he could continue to live as the center of the universe. Reading those pathetic messages and seeing his forced photos on social media, Sarah finally understood, with a clarity that filled her with peace. She had lost absolutely nothing. The life she thought she had lost was an illusion, a gilded cage where she was the only one cleaning the floor. The one who had lost was him. He had lost a companion, a partner, the mother of his son, and the only person in the world who was willing to manage his ego and his life in exchange for crumbs of affection. He hadn't lost a love. He had lost his base of operations. A few weeks later, on a Friday night, Michael called. His voice was warm and a little nervous. "Sarah, I'm sorry to call like this, but next week I'll be in your town for a conference. I'd love to see you meet Leo. If you're comfortable, of course. We could grab a coffee, no pressure at all." The invitation was so respectful, so different from David's demands, that Sarah found herself accepting without hesitation. "I'd love to, Michael." The meeting took place at a charming coffee shop downtown. When Michael walked in, Sarah felt her heart calm. He was a handsome man in a discreet way, with a gentle smile and eyes that conveyed calm. When he saw Leo in the stroller, his face lit up. "Wow, he's perfect, Sarah," he said, and the admiration in his voice was genuine. They talked for hours. Michael spoke about his own separation, a painful but necessary process he had started shortly after his confession at the grocery store. He talked about his daughter and how he was learning to be a more present father. Sarah talked about motherhood, about her plans to perhaps open a small baking business, an old dream she had shelved. The conversation flowed easily, lightly, as if they were old friends. There were no games, no masks. There were just two people who had been through similar storms and who now found a safe harbor in each other. At the end of the coffee, as they walked through the square, Michael stopped and turned to her. "Sarah, I know it's early, and I don't want to pressure you in any way. But what I said that day at the grocery store, I've never been more sincere in my life. You are an incredible woman, strong, kind, a wonderful mother, and I would really like the chance to get to know you better. For real." Sarah looked at him, at the man who saw her with the admiration David reserved for his wife. The irony was almost comical, but the feeling was real. She wasn't looking for a new love, but maybe, just maybe, love had found her. And looking to the future for the first time without fear, she felt that destiny, with its peculiar sense of humor, was finally starting to prepare something much, much better for her. And that's today's story, a journey about the value that sometimes is only perceived when we lose it, but which fortunately can always be found by those who truly know how to look. What did you think of Sarah's transformation and David's outcome? Do you believe that destiny really prepared something better for her alongside Michael? I really want to know your opinion. Leave your rating here in the comments from 0 to 10 for this story of rediscovery and self-love. If you were moved and believe that everyone deserves to be valued, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and be part of our community. A kiss on the heart, and until the next one.